Welcome to Parallax by Ankur a podcast produced by Radcliffe Cardiology to bring you a new angle of all things cardiology and the best from the US Cardiology Review. Published every second Monday, Ankur MD, interventional cardiologist at the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio, USA, speaks with legendary cardiologists, reviews late-breaking trials, and interviews authors of our latest and best US Cardiology Review articles. We call them #audio articles. Parallax is the effect whereby the position or direction of an object appears to differ when viewed from different positions. So this podcast is your fix of reliable updates on all things cardiology by someone from a non-traditional background who is always looking at the industry from a new angle. Now, here's your host, Ankur MD.
Hello, everyone. I have the honor and the privilege today of having a guest on our show, which who needs no introduction. Really, he his career has been exemplary. He's a force and a voice in our field. Has represented not only interventional cardiologists, but cardiovascular disease and cardiologists at large, very eloquently nationally. When every now and then cardiology has been at the center of debate. When it comes to stenting for stable coronary disease, or some policy-related questions, or even gender bias within cardiovascular medicine. He's always been a very respectable voice. We all know him very dearly when we see videos at TCTMD and other cardiovascular research foundation related educational material. So I'm sure the audience may have guessed by now who the speaker is. He's the director of the cardiac cath labs at Columbia University Medical Center and New York Presbyterian Hospital in New York. It's my absolute honor and pleasure to welcome Dr. Kirtane. Ajay, welcome on the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me and for the too kind introduction.
No, it's our pleasure. We've been wanting to do this, and I know you've been busy. We've with TCT, and congratulations, by the way, for a very successful meeting. I know you're one of the course co-directors and on the faculty, so it was very well attended. Some great science presented as usual. Every year. So thank you for taking the time to do this. I know how busy you are. So.
No, not at all. It's actually been great, and to be honest with you, TCT was a great success, but it's not because of the people that organize. First of all, that's a huge team of people, but I think honestly, it's the participation of all the faculty and the attendees, and as I said, the team from CRF that really puts it together. And I think for folks like myself that have talks and are more visible, for every one of me, there's probably 20 people behind the scenes who never get any recognition, who really put together the meeting in this organization. So actually all the credibility is on their side, and they just make it look good.
Yeah, no, that's very kind of you, and I'm sure the people who are listening would deeply appreciate the acknowledgement that you've just given them. So without much further ado, I wanted to just dive right into just a bit of your background. I'm sure people who work with you know about it all, but for people who see you from a distance, who see you on the videos or on panels, but would really like to know the journey behind the current Ajay Kirtane, who we all know and admire. Take us back into how high school was and how childhood was, and when did you really think about becoming a physician, and then your paths into cardiovascular disease and cardiology and interventional cardiology, and to where you are now. I know it's a broad question, but we can probably go stepwise, and we'll take it from there.
No problem at all. I mean, I was born in the U.S. To Indian physician parents who came over in the late 60s. And for the young ones on this podcast, that's the 1960s, but last century, last millennium. But both my parents, were physicians. They did their training in Brooklyn, and I grew up in northern Jersey. And I never wanted to be a physician, because all Indian kids, that's what they did. They were going to be docs, and they were going to be engineers, and I was not going to do that, because I was sort of a liberated first generation American, and I was going to do something totally different. So actually in college, at the one very pivotal juncture, when I was going to be a philosophy major or something like that, my dad, I was local, so my dad actually asked me to come home for the weekend just to hang out and that sort of thing. I came home, and he sort of told me that organic chemistry would keep my options open. And I don't know, somehow I was hoodwinked into believing that. I think there was an argument, but I was hoodwinked into believing it. I actually showed up back at college with a new pair of basketball sneakers, and I told my roommates that I was going to sign up for organic chemistry, and they said, you have a new pair of basketball sneakers, and it certainly looked like a quid pro quo to them. I didn't feel like that at all, but I guess it kind of was. But anyway, I ended up doing organic chemistry. I loved it. I ended up, it was actually the best class I ever did in college or anything like that. And I ended up tutoring organic chemistry as well. Ultimately decided to do molecular biology. But after a senior thesis, which was required, I really got bored in the lab by myself. So I decided to apply MD PhD and then drop the PhD, which was financially a really stupid thing to do, but I did it because I didn't want to take someone's spot when I kind of felt that I wanted to have more patient interaction and personal interaction through an MD. So that's kind of how I got into medicine. Cardiology, I joke that it's kind of the Indian genetic expression that comes forth when people are in their internal medicine residency, either cardiology or GI. And I certainly couldn't stand the smell in GI, so I ended up in cardiology. But I think the main thing I liked about it was there were a lot of trials, there was a lot of data, and there was a lot of things that we could actually do to help patients and also make accurate diagnoses of patients. So that aspect of things really appealed to me. As far as intervention specifically, that came on later. I definitely wasn't somebody in fellowship who loved the cath lab immediately. I thought it was interesting, but I kind of like the cognitive aspects behind making some of the decisions and the diagnostics of it. I did as a kid, like to disassemble my watch and was, I guess, relatively good with my hands doing things like that. And so it seemed like somewhat of a natural fit to be able to use my hands during procedures. But I really always liked the cognitive aspects and the fact that there were really so many trials in interventional cardiology and the space was constantly changing. So that's kind of the circuitous route to how it came about.
Yeah, no, thanks for taking us through the path. I think it's always fascinating to hear, sort of pivot points in people's journeys and careers when they make those crucial decisions that then shape up how the rest of their career is going to look like. So, thank you for delving into that. It's also very fascinating for me that you bring up the inherent genetic predisposition for a brown kid who happens to be in internal medicine to then pick up cardiovascular medicine or cardiology as a career subspecialty. Because I was born and raised in India. My father is a cardiologist, and I always wanted to. So I always wanted to do cardiac surgery because I said to my father that internists are too boring, and I'm not a boring sort of a guy, but that changed. My decision making changed when I was a fourth year medical student because I didn't like the non-cognitive aspect of a surgeon. I'm not saying that surgeons are not cognitive, individuals or cognitive people. This is not a blanket statement, but just where I was training, I just didn't feel the cognitive drive that I could see in internal medicine to be the same in surgery. So I changed. I pivoted. But and then after when it was internal medicine, it was pretty much written on the wall that it'll be cardiology. So tell me a little. Let's I wanted to talk with you more about this. What do you think about, what do you have to say about cardiovascular disease space, particularly being heavy with people of Indian origin? Because I've been asked that question several times. So curious to just to learn your thoughts on this.
Well, I think some of it is because it is very interesting. And there's the cognitive component, there's a procedural component, I will tell you that I do think that having talked to friends and other people growing up, there is a fair amount of a prestige factor that goes into it. I have to say, I was, in retrospect, incredibly privileged to be completely immune to that. Aside from that one time with my dad in organic chemistry, my parents never once actually influenced me overtly or any other way to go into medicine. They had a very interesting, or cardiology or anything like that. They had a very interesting background themselves. Neither of them worked full time. Each of them was a part-time person. My dad actually had done cardiology, but ended up doing ER so that he could work part-time and be around for us as kids growing up. I would say that, yes, we, lived in a very nice town and that sort of thing, but, the car that we drove growing up literally had, either a hole in the floor where you could see the road, or a hole in the ceiling where like the stuff from the ceiling would come down on your head. It was like the anti-materialistic thing, and in fact, it was like a badge that we would always drive the worst car. Never really got that many new clothes. I had to argue with my mom all the time about stuff like that. And I'm divulging a lot about myself, but I guess the reason I'm saying it is that there was never once this feeling that you would have status in society, or that doing cardiology you'd make a lot of money or anything like that. And so I was honestly completely immune to that. But I do think that for many potential immigrant cultures, the appeal of not just the money, but the ability to actually have a respectful place in society, for instance, as a cardiologist, is something that influences many people that I've spoken to. So I think there's some aspect of that as well. I would like to think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that there's a lot of data and that we can really help people. But I think that there is that component specific with the procedural specialties of cardiology and GI that goes into it.
Yes, yeah, thank you for sharing some of the insights again, from your childhood into what may go behind the decision making for why. I get asked this question a lot, and I pretty much say, I think it's, to me, the perception is prestige. Like you said, I think it's a lot has to do with the perception of prestige. But I also say that I think at least the people that I've come across or I've met, genuinely come across as people who are very, very passionate about cardiology as a specialty, because it is a very fascinating specialty. I mean, there's something at least I'm sure it is for you as well, and that shines through in whatever you've done in your career. But I'd like to believe that it's passion driving a lot of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, 100%. Here's the thing: if you're a parent and you have the opportunity you want your kid to do well, and period, and that means well across a wide variety of spheres. So I think it's no accident that there are other components to it that make it good to be a cardiologist. But I think, and many people, when you're in it, if you're in a field, you better, like medicine, with the hours that we work, you better enjoy it. And what's not to like? It's a fantastic field, and you really can help patients. And honestly, there's a continuity of things that, especially as a proceduralist, that I sense that's different than that in the surgical fields, where you may operate on somebody and legitimately save their life, but then that's it. That's the component you have with them. And that's the interaction you have with them. Whereas for me, I get to follow them in the office, I get to see their family members, and I continue to follow them. So there's that continuity as well. So look, there are a lot of great things about it, but I think one of the reasons why it is a field that a lot of people aspire to be has to do with the other factors too.
Sure. So moving on, you've touched a lot upon your childhood, and also thank you for sharing the story about your father as to how he chose to be an ER physician and work part-time so that he could balance time between work and family. Tell us a little bit more about how that shaped your childhood, and how that has translated into you being a father now. How is that? How has your father influenced you? For lack of a better word, into the father that you are now. And
Well, look,
yeah.
yeah, no, I think in many respects, I don't think I'm as good as he was, because I'm just not around as much. I think that my wife and my wife is amazing, by the way. She was an ex-corporate lawyer, who, you know, yeah, did as well as I did in college, and fantastic public speaker. She's just amazing, and she decided that she didn't want to do that, and she wanted to be home with our kids. And so she does that plus four other jobs, that she works at as well, but her schedule's a lot more flexible. So many times I feel like, it's together that we're able to offer the family support that many Indian kids do get, because family is so important to our culture, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I moved back close to home, and so my brother, my sister, my wife's parents, my wife's essentially her sister, and their family all live like really close to us, and so everybody's involved with our family. And so in many respects, it's surrogacy for the kids, but I also do obviously make the effort to take time to spend time with them as best as I can, and whether that's on vacation or that's for concerts, or other aspects of what they're doing that I'm involved in. I think it's so important to take it seriously. I will take a second, though, to credit the folks I work with, because many people, see folks like, Marty or Jeff Moses, people like that, and they say, oh, they're just workaholics and that sort of thing. There's no way I could spend the time I spend with my kids had it not been with them encouraging it. Jeff Moses spends a ton of time with his kids. His kids are integrally involved in his life. He talks about them. He talks about trips with them. He talks about what he's on the weekend with them all the time. Marty as well. I mean, he's got a daughter that is, a professional musician. His son. I mean, I know all about this because we talk about it. And so it's a side of them that I don't think many people know about. But there's no way, as a junior person, I would be able to do some of the things I do without being able to talk openly with the people I work with about those interests, and those passions of mine. So I think there's a lot of credit that goes there too.
Yes. No. So again, thank you for bringing up, people like Marty Leon and Jeff Moses, who are, international, phenomena in our field, and it's very refreshing to hear that it's family time is equally important to them, and we all know how busy all of you are, and it's refreshing. It's also, it drives home the point that, at least for me, and that's something that I've started to inculcate more, this year, compared with previous years. And that is that, when I'm home with my 2-year-old, a little over 2, he's 27 months, I try to not pick up anything else, just away from devices, away from my computer. I just want to spend that, because, like you said, like time that at least I spend with him is very little, is like 3 hours a day, 2 to 3 hours a day, maybe. And I want that specific time to just be with him. I just don't want any other distraction. So that even though the time is little, it's high quality time. So that's very refreshing to hear from you.
Well, you're a good person for it. I think there's just two things I would basically say. One is that, you do have to have the uninterrupted time. I remember writing a paper during fellowship, and my daughter was, I think, 3 or 4 at the time, and she asked me what I was doing. I said, I'm writing this paper, and she goes, why are you doing it? I said, I have to do it. And she said, I think you are choosing to do it. I mean, like 4-year-old. So, I closed the computer, and then I hung out with her. So you do have to have uninterrupted time. But the other part of it is that a lot of times we all want the time to be quality time. But if you don't have enough quantity of it, then you're not going to get it when you want it. So there are times when I remember I was free and I'm like, hey guys, let's hang out and let's do something. And somebody has one event, or somebody has some homework, or somebody has something else, particularly as the kids get older.
Yeah.
And then that quality time, even though you've gotten some quantity there, is not going to be quality. And that's most depressing, because you know how hard it was to get that time block. So, but if you do it enough, then each time you do it, there's an opportunity for it, and then also it becomes very natural and organic as opposed to forced.
Yeah. So as an extension to that, let me ask you this: do you make a conscious effort to not take work back home? Because like I always have work to do. I can't even imagine your schedule and the list of things you have to do on a daily basis, or on a weekly basis. Just to think about it from a work week standpoint. Do you make that conscious effort, or has it come to a point where it's not even it's it, it can't happen in your scenario? Just curious
No, I
to.
think there's different strategies to it. First of all, one of the things that's nice about being involved in all the meetings that we're involved in, I've been able to ask a lot of people about what their strategies are, and I wasn't shy about doing that earlier on in my career, especially. And so I've kind of taken what I think is a good hodgepodge of good ideas that are out there. So I think a few things. So number one is that if there's like an event that needs to happen, like a concert or something like that, Ted Feldman in particular told me just schedule it with the same priority you would schedule something else. And that's important because then you don't bump it for something else that might come up. And for those times, yes, you try to be completely uninterrupted, not bringing work to it, not checking your phone during. There are other strategies, like if you have papers to write or abstracts to write, and you can do it later at night, you can do it early in the morning, odd times. Some people always say, oh, you don't ever sleep because you send me emails at like 3 in the morning. Well, part of the reason for that is because I'm trying to preserve when I'm doing what I'm doing. And then, yeah, that means I may have woken up at 3 in the morning, unfortunately. I do sleep. Actually, I try to sleep a lot, actually. The other aspect is that on vacations, for instance, I definitely unplug, and we try to go on vacations, for instance, where there's no cell phone service. So then there's no excuse or anything like that. There are other vacations where I'll get up and take care of some stuff super early in the morning, and then I'm free after that. So it just really depends on scheduling time. There's also a lot of things that we do that are time sinks that we don't necessarily realize. So every once in a while on social media, for instance, you understand that you're getting sucked into the black hole of social media. So I'll just, like last weekend, not check at all the entire weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So things like that, I think, are helpful. You just have to have a continuous monitor on yourself and try to be objective about what you're doing, what time you're spending, and be realistic about it and prioritize accordingly.
Yeah, no, great insights. So to my next question, which I think a lot of the early careers would really value your answers and sort of how you navigated that that phase and that time in your career, because it's I'm still in that phase. I'm 2 years out. This is my third year, and I've changed jobs already, and the data sort of suggests that 70% of job changes happen within the first year of you starting a job, which to me was fascinating when I was going through a job transition myself. How did you navigate clinical development and academic development, and still nurture a family? Because I was listening to Indra Nooyi, the former CEO of PepsiCo, and it was fascinating what she was describing. She was saying that the biological clock seems to be in complete turmoil with the career clock, because it's like when it's time to nurture and develop a family, it's also time to develop your career, and the two don't go well in hand in hand. So how did you do it? What were some of the conscious efforts or tasks that you took on or not take on to develop that phase of your career? Because I'm sure that phase laid the foundation of where you are now.
Yeah, I think I've been very fortunate, to be perfectly honest with you. I think that there are definitely a lot of smart people out there. There are a lot of well-spoken people out there. There are a lot of technically good people out there, and I happen to be kind of right place, right time, and things worked out, and that enabled me to capitalize on things in that way. So, for instance, even getting the job at Columbia, I sent my CV to a whole bunch of places. I had written a lot of papers as a fellow, literally like in the 20s, and still there aren't like academic jobs out there. And it just so happened that Dave Cohen knew Roxana Moran, and Roxana was looking for someone to help her working in the CRF data center at that time, and I happened to do statistical training, and that worked out. And I mean, literally, I don't think they had hired somebody from the outside in a really, really long time, other than like a super high-profile recruit, which I obviously was not coming out of fellowship. So I think that that was right place, right time. And then by coming here, that enabled me and my family to be close to other family. And so a lot of the family development part, plus the decision my wife had made to not go back to work, really helped me in that way. I think the other part, though, that you can sort of actively do as a strategy, and it's not as a strategy, it's actually, I think it's just good life lessons, is I've always been pretty honest and transparent about, what I can do and what I can't do. I don't overpromise and underdeliver. Like, that's a cardinal sin, and that's from my parents. You just don't do that. And so, when it came to doing certain types of activities or otherwise, I would just be very honest about it and say, look, I can't do that right now, or this is why I can't do it. And I wouldn't just say I can't do it and kind of hide. I would explain why I couldn't do it. And so, interestingly, when I started at Columbia, I was 3 days a week down at CRF working in the data center, and supposedly 2 days up in the cath lab here, but you don't really get to just do cases. We don't have a lab where there's just unassigned cases that go to the lab. There were some things that I would do late nights on Fridays and add-ons, but I wasn't exactly getting to do a lot of hands-on. And I think as a junior attending, that's something you really need to do if you're going to be a credible interventionalist. And I had a great fellowship experience where we basically did 2 years of intervention, coronary, peripheral, everything, complex cases, atherectomy, everything. And so what ended up happening is I actually went to Jeff and Marty and Greg, and I sort of said, look, unfortunately, I'm not doing as much clinical as I need to do. Not that I'd like to do, but I need to do. And there may be other ways that I can contribute. And I understand I came here as a certain role, working in the data center, and Roxana as well, I told her. But that's not what I ultimately need to be able to do for myself. And so if there's no role for me, clinically, then I get it. I came here as a recruit for academics and research. So if there's no role for me, I'm more than happy to say, I go somewhere else and look elsewhere. And honestly, I didn't mean it in a vindictive way. It wasn't for leverage. It was just being honest. I knew I came for a specific role and I wasn't able to do that role. So then I should probably go somewhere else. And what was interesting is, I guess because I was clinically good, then Jeff made the ability, and they all spoke together and made a more clinical role for me. But because I was always academically interested, it wasn't like I was throwing that away. I still wanted to be very involved, and I had skills in that way. And so that's kind of how I was able to navigate the clinical academic part of it. I think that's probably the hardest thing for people, is because we always want to have certain family time, but to negotiate between the clinical practice and the academic part is really, really hard, because patients obviously take priority because they're sick. But yet you can't leave things dormant on the academic side, because then they'll languish or they'll go to somebody else. So that's probably the hardest thing I have a problem with.
No, it's fascinating. I think what's also really valuable about you sharing that experience is the honesty component is like being honest to yourself and being honest to the people who you're working with, and having I shouldn't say a hard conversation, but a very honest conversation, like a very frank conversation of what you envision for yourself, as in your career, or as an academic interventional cardiologist. So thank you for sharing that. I certainly have learned a lot from that experience of yours.
No problem. I do want to also recognize, though, it does come from a position of a lot of privilege to be able to sort of say, well, okay, I don't want to do this, I can do this. And there are a lot of other people who don't have the option to be able to have those conversations. And for those people, it's tough. And I don't have great advice for people who, they depend upon X, Y, or Z, and their visa is going to get revoked if they don't, do that X, Y, and Z. So for me, as I said, I've started off by saying super fortunate. The people I've trained, the background that I have, et cetera, that allows me to sort of just really be brutally honest and open, so that the consequences are okay. I'm fine with it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm in that situation. Like FT is one, and I have to do clinical work because I'm on a visa, which is for clinical work. So all the research work that happens on my own time, on weekends and nights, like you mentioned earlier. And I'm trying to be in a situation or be in a position where, at some point, I can, get at least a day in a week where I could spend more time, academically. But again, I'm still early on, and I enjoy and value the time that I spend in the lab because, it's important. It's important to be clinically busy early on in your career as an interventionalist, like you said. So, as an extension to that conversation, what do you look, because you obviously are mentoring a lot of the early career people, and also fellows in training. You're the fellowship program director as well for interventional cardiology. What do you specifically look out for junior faculty and their career development and their career trajectory, and or do people seek you out in terms of, having conversations like these? How do you monitor their careers? Do they monitor their careers? Talk to us a little bit more, because I mean, you're in a very, academically very rich environment with fellows and with junior faculty and with house staff. And it's I mean, I had the privilege of interviewing at Columbia. It's a very inspirational environment to be in. So I'm sure there are very incredibly smart and hardworking people around you all the time, which keep you at least would keep me motivated. I'm sure they keep you motivated. Do you monitor their careers?
I do. I think that I'm not directly. I'm the director of the cath lab, but I'm not the head of interventional cardiology. Marty is, and he does. I mean, the amount of mentoring that he does, despite all the things that he does otherwise, is incredible. I mean, I've literally seen him, taking care of medical students and interns, and I'm thinking to myself, wow. I mean, he doesn't have to meet with these people, but yet he does, and that he embraces that as his role. And I think over time, that's kind of what keeps people in academics, is the ability to work with younger people who are enthusiastic, have that fire in the belly, are super smart, come up with new ideas, and challenge what we think and are going to change the future. So it's starting to happen more for me now. I think now I'm kind of 11 years out from starting, so that's when people start asking for advice. Certainly, along the way, people will always ask you, "Should I do this? Should I do that?" And happy to help them at all times. But it's been always something that I've done with our fellows, either our interventional fellows or general fellows, who I'm working with in a variety of ways. And as I said, it's what makes it fun to be in academic medicine. Um, there are a lot of academic, quote unquote, academic places that function as just practices, and there's nothing wrong with that. Taking care of patients is great, but the ability to help train and teach is something that I've always really enjoyed doing. And I think I have a specific way of teaching that is based upon all the different people I've worked with. And I do enjoy trying to help convey that to trainees.
Yeah, no, that's great. I had this sort of similar conversation with Dr. Kleiman as well. That episode was just released.
That was your last episode, right?
Yeah, that was the last episode. Yeah, and he sort of said similar things. He said it's obviously he tries to monitor it, but it's more so people like seeking him out and reaching out to him. And I think people in academics constantly, at least I do. I'm sure others that my colleagues that I look up to, that I collaborate with, do as well. Have a barometer. I'm not trying to say that we compare each other. I think comparison, it should not. It happens subconsciously, but it really shouldn't happen. I've trained myself to not. The only person I compare myself is me. If I'm a better version of myself than I was yesterday, and then things are good. But I don't really. Yeah, I don't really want to compare my career or my journey or my paths to X, Y, or Z. I mean, we're all colleagues. I really value relationships, and um, and camaraderie.
Oh, and I would highly, highly recommend. I mean, if there's one bit of advice, is yes, be aware of what's going on around you, but absolutely don't compare yourself to other people, because you
Yeah.
will literally go crazy, and that's what can destroy a group is the quasi one-upmanship, and there are a lot of things that are imagined or perceived that are not even real.
Yeah.
Because you just don't know the whole story. And so it's really, really important not to do that and to celebrate everyone's successes as part of the group. So if somebody does something well that's, you know, one of your colleagues, you should be happy for them. You shouldn't be then saying, oh, well, that I feel inadequate or I need to do X, Y, and Z. Motivation is great. It's good to say, okay, well, somebody did something, so now I have to do something. But certainly don't try to one up the other person. That never works out and really will destroy the group. The final thing I'll say is that on that is that, you know, Marty does. He actually meets with everybody once a year minimum, but certainly more often than that, to try to get people's careers in the right trajectory. And this goes he goes into detail about what specific projects one's working on, what meetings one is going to or invited to, what people want to do differently. Sometimes, you know, people say, oh, I want to do, you know, I want to be the TAVR person. Well, we already have a TAVR person. So maybe that's not the best thing for this person, but, you know, he really actively is involved in that way. And it's, again, the strength of his that people that have worked with him know about, but people that just see him and they view him as, you know, this rock star icon of interventional cardiology would have no idea that he actually does and takes the actual human effort and time to do these.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, it really is. So I mean, I didn't know. I obviously know him. I know his work. I just didn't know that particular aspect of him. So, you know, thank you for sharing that with our audience. I'm sure it's going to be refreshing for everyone. People who know him would know him, but, you know, for the ones like me who know him from a distance, this is obviously refreshing and very good to hear. You brought up, and, you know, thanks again for sort of explaining and also elaborating a bit more on comparison. It's interesting that you said that, because, you know, I sort of I have experienced that at different stages, you know, through fellowship and as well as early career. And there's a paper that's going to come out in the European Heart Journal. It's an opinion piece which I wrote with another early career cardiologist, and it's called Schadenfreude, which is, you know, to find joy in someone else's misery. But it's a philosophical, spiritual piece. I'm going to share it with you. I think you're probably going to enjoy it. Probably request you to share your viewpoints on Twitter as well. But I just wanted to delve a little bit more on this particular topic with you, that you brought it up, is, you know, envy and jealousy in amongst colleagues. You know, first of all, I think there should be no room, like you said. But I think the root of such emotions is comparison. And have you experienced them? If you haven't, I mean, that's great, and I wish none of us have to, because they're very destructive, and they also consume a lot of energy in a negative, adverse way, not in a constructive, in a very destructive way. So talk to us a bit more about that, if you may.
Yeah, look, these are human instincts, and so everybody's going to experience them from time to time. But it comes back to conversations I've had with my family, and they have always sort of said, just, you know, you're you, put your head down, do your work. Good things will happen. If good things don't happen right now, they're going to happen eventually. Or you then figure something else out, and you always have your family and you have your base. For me, I think that family grounding that I always come home to. And it's not just my, you know, my son, my daughter, my wife, and our dog, who actually, by the way, yeah, you know, now I can, you know, even quote observational evidence that dogs are associated with greater longevity. But it makes a big difference, by the way. But just the rest of the extended family, I mean, all of that's who I am. I've been at, you know, my kids have seen me lecture in the main arena, and I thought it was a big deal. There's going to be a lot of people there, and they've told me immediately afterwards, like, we didn't understand a word you're saying, and, you know, by the way, it's not that full in here anyway. So those types of things really ground you and make you understand that, yeah, we have a rarefied world, but it's kind of insular. And in the greater scheme of things, it doesn't mean a whole lot. And that honestly gets to, Indian, if you will, spirituality and what we learn about, just the Brahman and the Atman and all these terms that people may not know what I'm talking about, but it's just you're a small part of a very big thing. And we're all the same, and it's just temporary. It's Maya, and it's going to go away. And so all of that stuff, which by the way, I grew up with, it brings to bear on these feelings and really allows you to just control them because they're distractions and they're just gnawing at you, but you don't really need them. So I think that when you have those supports of your character and of your family, then it's easier, not easy, but it's easier to fight these bad feelings and to get rid of them.
Yeah, no, you were born and raised in the U.S., but you've impressed me with words that you've just used, like Brahman, Atman, and Maya. So, yeah, kudos to your parents.
Yeah, those are three easy ones. Those are three easy ones. A composer could give you those as well.
No.
No, but it's been, actually, my family and my wife and kids go to and teach at a school on the weekends where it's based on the Swami Vivekananda's philosophies and Vedanta specifically, and all of this has been with me growing up. So I think it's actually very easy to apply practically because that was actually Swami Vivekananda's goal anyway, was to apply it practically.
Sure.
And Sri Ramakrishna actually as well. So for those that don't know what we're talking about, it's very interesting reading. It's fascinating. But the idea really is that through your basic work, you can use that as a way of spiritual realization. That's something called karma yoga.
Yeah, no, I'm a big believer in karma yoga, and I also follow the Gita, which I think is a great text. It's very dense, so you do need a teacher. So I listened to a podcast by an Indian architect by the name of Neil Bhatt. He probably does not know that I exist. So there's no conflict of interest there. Just wanted to make sure everybody knows that. But I listened to his podcast as with him being a teacher, because he guides me through all of the 18 chapters of the Gita. But is there any spiritual text that you read? Because you obviously, I've known you as a phenomenal cardiologist, but for the first time, to me, you've come across as a very spiritual person, which I deeply, deeply value. So congratulations and thank you for bringing that side of yours to the being, for me at least, for the audience, for the listeners. Is there any particular?
No congratulations. Yeah. No congratulations needed. It's just what I've grown up with. And to be perfectly frank with you, I don't do enough reading at all in this regard, especially. So it's just a matter of what I've been around with my family growing up, and my wife is probably, she should get her on the podcast. She's much more knowledgeable in this regard.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. I've sort of taken the spiritual path. I think it's almost been getting close to be about a year when I consciously chose to read the Gita every day, and it's been a paradigm, because of what was going on with my life last year. So Ajay, thank you so much for your time. I know we always go overboard because these conversations are so engaging, because we get to know the person behind the cardiologist we all admire and want to emulate. You've certainly you may not know this, but you've certainly been a silent force in my career. People like you and Bobby are folks that I really look up to when I think of emulating a career. So you've been a very silent force.
So people know who he is.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to give him his last name so he gets the full shout out. Yeah, thank you. Look. I mean, that it means a ton to me to hear that. We're certainly not perfect. He'll say the same thing, and we definitely learn all the time. And frankly, it's by seeing other people and not being envious or jealous, but actually seeing what they've been able to do productively, that you get more inspired. So for me, and that can come from older, that can come from younger, that can come from different fields too. Thanks so much for the kind words. It's actually really, it's nice to hear.
Yeah, no. So thank you for your time, and hope so. This would go live I would say in about 3 weeks. The next episode is with Dr. Stone. Actually, I could snatch 20 minutes from him. Yeah, from his.
That's good, but don't talk to him about karma yoga and that sort of thing.
Yeah, no. So we've recorded that episode already. It's gonna be broadcast before this one does, and then I'm gonna give you a shout out on Twitter, and if you could, help us spread the word about the podcast, that'll be phenomenal. So thanks again for your time.
No, happy to do it. Thanks for having me. It was a fun conversation, and look, a lot of things to look forward to in the next few weeks. AHA is coming up, but besides that, just hopefully everybody's going to enjoy this fall season and the holidays with their family.
Yeah, no, it's the favorite season of the year for me. You brought up AHA. I'm gonna, and you're the guru for stable coronary disease. Ischemia is gonna get presented at AHA. Any thoughts on ischemia?
Look, I don't know. It's a long conversation.
Yeah.
And, I'm sure we'll have more going forward. But look, I think that this is the population you need to study to demonstrate a benefit of coronary revascularization over, guideline-directed medical therapy, if there is one. And so the big question will be, were the right patients enrolled in the trial? And then also, was the revascularization done in an appropriate way? But I'm sure Judy Hockman will say it, and I've had conversations with her directly about it, that this is what coronary revascularization is around the world. This is truly a global trial. And while it may be all good and fine for specific folks to say, well, we do revascularization differently at our rarefied academic centers, that may be true, but this is how coronary revascularization is done around the world. And so I think the trial has a good design, and we'll see what the results are. So I have to say personally, although the prevailing wisdom is, this is going to be a negative study, I think I'm cautiously optimistic, because I think that revascularization in very high-risk patients, there are enough streams of data to suggest that there's a benefit. So this is the right patient to study, and the trial design makes some sense.
All right, great. Well, Ajay, thanks again very much, and happy Halloween, and we'll keep in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, take care. Thanks.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Dear cardiologists, we want to make this podcast about you and for you. So please email us your critical thoughts, comments and questions at podcast@radcliffe-group.com and visit uscjournal.com for more information. You can also follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook and Instagram at Radcliffe Cardiology for daily updates. Join thousands of cardiologists and become a Radcliffean by registering to radcliffecardiology.com. You will receive regular newsletters and gain access to hundreds of expert interviews, educational webinars, clinical cases, and peer-reviewed articles from our 6 medical review journals on general cardiology, interventional cardiology, arrhythmia and electrophysiology, cardiac failure, and vascular and endovascular surgery. Thank you.